Well, we're live. So,
Way,
welcome, Shaun. Hey,
the
let
first
some people
one.
come in here a little bit, and we see, 5 people already joining us. I want to thank the people who are joining us, and we have a lot to talk about for the next bit of time. I don't know how much time you want to talk, but I'll go as long as you want to go.
Go as long as
And
you want to go.
yeah, we definitely want to bring some people into what's happening in Ukraine, real time with the blackouts and the current situations, and then, of course, we have an overarching story that we want to talk about with the Interpol, you know, um, red notice abuse.
Mm.
Since some people are already joining us that are going to be listening, so let's just kind of cut into what's happening. You're down in the south, yeah? You're in Dnipro.
Yeah, well, it's sort
What's
of
the
central
situation like there?
Ukraine, really.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, is central Ukraine. Yeah, it's -15 today, so it's going to go.
Mm,
I think it's going to get a bit worse, but yeah, we're not essentially a frontline city, but we are a city that's inching ever closer to the front line, and
right.
that's because of modern technology, the innovations that both sides are making, and especially Russia able to sort of hit here more frequently now as they've got closer and closer, and
Right.
edging on the a blast. So it is. It's not a Kharkiv or Pokrovsk, but we're inching closer. Even this week, we had the big hit with the Starlink drones and the adaptations to the drones that are coming in, the Russians are learning, so they're hitting the logistics routes into places like Pokrovsk now and stuff like that. So it's a city to watch because at the early days, it was in the rear. Now it's very much a frontline hub city that's going to hit quite a bit.
And there's a lot of I was on the phone with a medic, one of our teammates, Andy Brame. Andy, I'm here now, like Andy instead of Andy. Um, Andy Brame worked with the hospitalers, and we were talking about the situation there. Where are the hot spots? And I said a lot of friends of mine are busy in Zaporizhia. Between Zaporizhia and Dnipro, there's a lot of folks I know doing work, and so I know that the Russians have upped the amount of attacks in that area, largely because of the soldiers that may come back and forth with Dnipro. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a hub city. It's a very big city. I keep
Hmm.
telling people, you hear the hits here, but most of the city doesn't get hit. So
Hmm.
it is a massive city. I think it's the third biggest in Ukraine, so
Hmm.
it's pretty big. But yeah, it is a hub city. Um, Going back to the Soviet times, it was a restricted city. It's where the R&D development was for the Soviet Union. So this is
Right.
the place where they built the rockets and the fuel and everything else that went into the Soviet era space system. So it was all done here. A lot of it in Dnipro, and a lot of the Black Sea Fleet was built here, I believe, too. So it is a big city on the Dnipro River, which is frozen at the moment. I can
Hmm.
say I mean, it's
Yeah.
impressive to see. It's like a kilometer across, and it's just frozen over.
Well, I have the same river is
Yeah, you
right.
do. Yeah.
And the first time I saw it not moving, and it's the Poton Bridge over here is 1.5 kilometers of Soviet steel, and I walked across it in the first winter when it had frozen over pretty well, and the whole bridge was a long ice rink across the entire thing. But to be able to walk as a Texan, to be able to walk across not only river but lakes that we have out here is not something I've done in my life. And here they're like, no, we're ice fishing. We have to hold on, and it turned into a whole sport.
Just
So
lunatics. They go
anyway,
out ice fishing right in the middle.
oh my God. Um, I want to go into a couple things for people who might not know who you are. I know plenty of. We'll get to backstory, but just for people who may not have heard this before, when did you come here to Ukraine, and what brought you here?
I was on a flight to Tijuana, and we just took a wrong turn. No, I literally, I was in the British military for 9 years. I
Mm.
learned how to fight Russia for 9 years, essentially, with a bit of Northern Ireland, training thrown in, and some operational tools there,
Mhm.
working with counter-terrorism and covert operations platoon over there.
Mhm.
But essentially, for most of my army career, I was learning how to fight Russia. And I went when I left the military. I served. I done really. I run my own business, hazardous waste management consultancy business in the UK. Did quite well at that. Sold bits of that. And then really, I sort of was at an impasse. I was at a place in my life where I could sort of make decisions what I want to do. I wasn't happy doing the same job, traveling around the M25, had a lack of purpose. I'd probably say I was in a midlife crisis, but I probably had to
Mm.
by then, if
Mhm.
I'm really honest.
Mhm.
But then a friend of mine was working out in Mariupol, and I had friends going to Kyiv who said they were working with the Ukrainian military. Would I be interested in coming as an instructor or working out there? And I
Right.
was like, no, it's Russia. Why would I want to go and fight Russia in the trenches? I know exactly what they're capable of. This is not the Taliban. This is not ISIS. You know, it's a
Mhm.
formidable enemy. And I came out for a holiday and never went home for 5 years. I went to Mariupol, saw my friend, said, "You interested in staying?" And I said, "Yeah." But at that time, it was spring. I'd arrived in February where it was like -20 and pretty depressing, and Soviet buildings, and thinking, "What have I come to?" And then the country changes in spring. It becomes this amazing
Uh,
country that I don't think I've ever experienced in the UK,
the
really.
fields when you drive
Oh, sun
around
comes
the
out and
fields.
the heat comes, and the transition between cold and warm is very quick here. You know, one minute it's
Right.
cold, next minute, the sun's come out, it's baking hot, and the summers here are amazing. So I sort of didn't go home for 5 years, and then met my wife on the front lines here. She was a deminer,
Oh, okay.
working for a civilian company out here, and we sort of got married in Mariupol 2 years later, and next thing you know, I've got my family, and I'm living in Mariupol, in 2000 since 2018, really.
Right.
And I'd built a life here, and our friends and communities built up around our marriage, and slowly became accepted. I couldn't get any more further east without going into Russia, but I loved it. I mean, I wanted to retire here and help the country, get my visa, get my citizenship, and sort of stay within the country. And if I'd have gone to Spain, nobody would have given me a second look. But because I come to Ukraine, it's a bit of a different place to go for your retirement. And by that time I'd come over, I was in my 40s. So, I
Right.
sort of wasn't looking to sign a contract and be in the army 3 years fighting Russians.
And then, of course, 4 years ago, I want to talk less about like the seizure of Mariupol, which is fairly well covered, but that month before, that December into January into February, take us back there a little bit for you.
Oh, I'd been in country, so by that time, just before the invasion, I was okay with language. I just because where I lived, the geographical location, I learned Russian, not Ukrainian,
Mhm.
ironically,
Sure.
Suzik, which is a mixture of the both.
Right.
So I sort of didn't really learn Ukrainian. I probably would say I didn't understand the political situation here as much as I do
Mhm.
now. When
Mhm.
I first came, but I'd come with 9 years learning how to fight Russians, and I'd already built up. I'd already worked with one of the best units here, Azov, and worked with them in Mariupol for 2 years. And then only because I needed a visa, I decided to join the Marines for a 3-year contract to sort of cement my place in the country. Give something to the country, because you're living here. You should be serving your country if you're going to live in the country and you want something in return. So I was
Deuce,
quite happy.
I
Go
had
on.
this conversation with someone earlier about a Ukrainian I know who there was some tension. And the tension was about the excuses made to not find something you can do. If you're
Oh
not,
yeah, that's yeah.
you know what it's like with this. If you're not a soldier, that's fine, but do something beyond self-serving. Do something beyond branding the dream you had before the invasion, and you're still trying to fulfill something that's not coming back anytime soon. Be creative in that. And I know people here who are they're not soldiers, but they still do fundraising or they do something that's wired into what they're doing, so it still pushes it forward. And it's a form of mobilization in some capacity, even if it's not soldier level, you know. So yeah, exactly.
No, it's you won't find a place in my heart for anybody that's taking money and, relying upon the government. Then suddenly, when they're called for service, don't want to serve. So,
Exactly.
and there's a spot for everybody. You don't have to be an infantryman, or you don't have to, just be at the front line. You could be a drone operator, you could be logistics, you could be a transport manager, IT, intelligence, reconnaissance. There's so much you could do within the military that would. I think they're better at it now, the Ukrainians, at bringing people in to use their attributes rather than, you're going to an assault group or an assault company or infantry. But generally, I mean, I've served, so it's easy for me to say. I understand some people are concerned and scared, and it's not for everybody. But you shouldn't run from it. You should learn a bit more about it, what you can do, your attributes, and serve your country. I've interviewed some amazing people like
Mhm.
Oksana Pechenuk, who's the first woman to pass the Naval Academy in the UK, who's very inspiring and committed to serve her country. So you can believe the media that everybody's running and being press ganged in, but you've got
Right.
plenty of volunteers I can find you that sit you in front of a camera, and talk to you about their duty and obligations to the country and where they see themselves going within the military. So, and I
Right.
think that's the difference between defending your country and Ukraine and Russia, where they're being forced in and they're picking up,
And
you know.
that's the thing. So we have people who get that here, but also, and this is one of the things I wanted to definitely cover mostly tonight is people who came from abroad who heard that call in something, and something in them, whether they were soldiers already, which is a big sector of the folks who joined the Legion or joined in different territorials early on, but people who weren't as well showed up and said, "Make me useful." So
Yeah,
yeah. So speak to that a little bit about that foreign call that was the beckon call to come do something, because I'm sure those guys had to find guys like you to anchor themselves in.
it's different because I mean you've got a lot. Unfortunately, war attracts the nut jobs, the spaceship door gunners, the underwater knife fighter instructors, Ranger Dangers. It attracts those sorts of people. So you do, even now, I get a lot of people saying, I'm going to do what you do. And you sort of sit down and say, hold on a minute, you know, you don't want to do what I do. And how do I get there is the best one. I always get that. How do I get there? Who do I speak to? And I'm like, well, if you're ringing me and asking me about that, perhaps you shouldn't come, if you haven't
Right.
done your research or what you're doing. So you do get a lot of nut jobs. I would say out of 99% of the soldiers or potential candidates, I would call them, that come here, I won't even call them soldiers. I think probably 1% stay. And if you're here a year, you'll stay 5 years.
Right.
And I always separate them into killers, believers, and runaways.
Hmm.
And essentially, your believers are the easiest because they're quite honest. They understand that they'll talk to you about if they've had an experience within the military, and they're easy to mold, adapt, teach, and
Hmm.
that's the easy category. The killers are the more professional soldiers, people that sort of a range of people that have good morals, but just sometimes, drink a bit, go out alongside the tracks, find comfort in war and in war environments. And it might sound odd, but, people that are trained like professional soldiers, essentially in an age where we've been really peacekeepers and soldiering's been a bit of a sort of step back
Hmm.
into daily lives of the military. Now, your job is to kill the enemy at the end of the day. So
Hmm.
believe it or not, there are people that like that sort of mayhem and that work, and they're exceptionally good at it. You want them. What we didn't want was all the runaways, which is 99% of the people that come here, is drug problems, alcohol problems, mental issues, warrants, chased by their own country.
Hmm.
And there are plenty of those that come over trying to escape, thinking Ukraine's going to be the changed their life in some ways, but they bring a lot more problems than they cure. So it is an eclectic bunch here. It was worse now, I believe, in 2022 than it is now. I think Ukraine's got better at filtering them out. But essentially, you get a lot of people that believe in Ukraine as, it's the good. It's fighting for democracy. It's never asked to be invaded. It was never going to invade, not in a position to invade Russia. It wasn't a threat. I mean, it's more of a threat now than it was in 2022. But this war's been going on since, 2014. This is
Yeah,
not,
12 years now.
yeah, which people we don't talk about very often. It's not a war that started in 2022. This was, the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of East Ukraine, and I was here for that. So I'm sort of one of the only foreigners that was on the front lines during that time, that's able to sort of be able to talk about that, and about Trump's, you know, first presidency, where he was, did a full 4 years and didn't do much to stop, Putin invading East Ukraine then. So it's quite, I sit there putting my hair
Yeah,
out.
Jordan in the West.
I just pull my hair out, to be honest. I'm like, it's like, this war is Biden's war. No, it was you. I was there defended in Mariupol when you were president, and you weren't doing very much to stop Putin coming into Ukraine then. You're as much to blame as Biden. There's not many people with a sort of a Western springboard or a platform to be able to argue that case. And so hence I'm here talking to you.
And I love this topic, as you know, to call out that stuff. We'll get to Witkoff a little bit, but that topic here in Kyiv and across the country as well. But I live in Kyiv. There's a memorial wall near Saint Michael's Monastery. That's the honor wall, and you see from 2014 on until present day, they might have run out of wall space and done it a different way, but you can clearly see 2017 through 2021, the losses of soldiers and police officers across the country who were defending during that time. So it was not a bloodless Minsk II era of no casualties.
No, we lost a lot of people in Mariupol who were there before 2022,
Right.
who were working on the front lines, who taught me. I mean, I'd had 9 years experience in the British military, but that's not the same as learning about how to fight in a trench. I could teach some things, but they were teaching me as much as I was.
That's where I want to go, to articulate the differences.
Well, I mean, conventionally, I was teaching them. They had quite a lot of reliance on shooting apps, gadgets, Google Maps. Using their phone for a lot of things. They'd lost a lot of, when I first came in 2018. Basic combat skills, using maps, making your own maps, and reconnaissance. And they wanted to kill Russians, no doubt. But waiting for a commander rather than shooting a guy carrying a ladder who's just got an AK slung. It wasn't in their sort of, vocabulary. They just wanted to get a kill, record it, and send it back to their bosses. So, it was a lot about basic combat skills. I came as a sniper instructor. I was taken on as a sniper instructor, but basically they could shoot. A lot of the boys were really good shots and hunted and shot in their pastime. There was not much really they needed to learn on that, because when you're shooting from trench to trench, you'd be lucky if you get 1,000 meters line of sight. You're shooting from 400, 500, 800 meters, really up close some points. So generally, they taught me about the adaptations they made at fighting at close range, from trench to trench, and living in a trench for 9 months, and how to live off the land while you're supplementing your logistics and working in -30. I mean, that was the most extreme weather I'd ever been in. So while I could teach some, but that's how Ukraine military works. If somebody knows something, they teach and learn. It's not like they have a Brecon or a West Point as such. They have an officer training school, but they don't have a senior NCOs, and corporals were not a thing when I came in 2018. They didn't really regard them or put them in any high regard. So by the time 2022 came round, a lot of that had changed. We, being a NATO soldier, we were able to train with them, work with them. We did joint exercises. They copied, learned. So in sort of the 4 or 5 years I was here, I came at a really good time where I saw this Soviet centralized doctrine turn into more of a NATO decentralized army. And I was pretty confident before the full scale invasion when I did an interview with Sky saying, we'll give them a bloody nose. Well, we haven't just given them a bloody nose. We've followed up with a right hook, a left hook, got them on the ropes. And, and this is,
As I say,
the heavyweight king we're doing it to.
Yeah, my way of saying is you served up good barbecue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I look back at that interview. I do laugh when I say I give him a bloody nose, but that's just a British thing to say, to be honest.
Because we have this extreme cold over our cities, and despite that I have lights on right now, and I sent a screenshot to you that it draws very little because of the light panels. We're in blackout. We've been in blackout all day long. The power systems have been devastated. The power generation is non-existent. But I always think that there's friends of mine out there at the front and how they're living. Tell our viewers here, and by the way, to the viewers we have now, if you wouldn't mind, tell some of your friends that we're live now, so we can bring in an audience to enjoy this conversation with us. But tell our friends what the soldier's life right now in this extreme cold is like.
Well, I mean, first of all, for some reason, I mean, when I did my time out here, it was in Mariupol before the full-scale invasion. It gets to -30. That's enough where you come out of your living area, blindash, where you might have a wooden stove, but now you can't really do that because the jaws in artillery fire of drones, so you can't really do that. It's exceptionally cold at night, so whatever it is through the day, it's freezing, especially when the wind gets up at night. And the worst I've been is -28 to 30 degrees, where you come out of your accommodation and you flash freeze. Literally, your rifle will turn white because it's cold. Within 2 hours, you're shaking and doing press-ups to try and keep warm. It is exceptionally icy and cold through the winter. You have to sleep with your water to keep it warm and fluid if you want to drink.
The Russian trying to use his finger to open up the water bottle. I think it was kind of going viral.
Yeah. I mean, it's
finger trying to get the ice.
No showers, no washing really, because it's so cold. You try and keep warm and eat, but the logistics is pretty bad, especially now we're fighting. A lot of logistics are being dropped in by drones and unmanned vehicles, and so it's exceptionally gruesome living through the winter here. And it's exceptionally bad this year because the last 2 winters have been quite mild with a few cold bits thrown in, but this winter is the worst it's been for at least a couple of years, in my view. It's the wind is terrible, and I don't know for British listeners if I say it's like some parts of Ukraine's like fighting in East Anglia. It's flat, it's very thin forest and strip woods, very ploughed fields because it's the breadbasket of Europe, Ukraine. It's very hard territory to live in with very little windbreak. So even if the wind gets up and it's -15, suddenly, you can get hypothermia and frostbite quite quickly, especially if you're running around, you sweat a lot and then suddenly you stop and then you're in that temperature freezing because your sweat and you've got your thermals on. And so you can't regulate your sort of temperature of your body very well. And then you've got the added problem that your feet might get wet, socks, where do you change them? Personal hygiene, and then you can get trench foot, frostbite quite easily out through the winter. So it's exceptionally difficult conditions that you would probably expect Arctic trained soldiers to be trained in the British military, but Ukraine military, this is just standard. There is no Arctic training. You're in it. welcome to
You have
the
TV
sun.
with optical lines. I won't run over the numbers I know that the reach is right now, but it's a whole different war 1 year later than last year's winter war. And so how soldiers protect themselves knowing that you have to generate heat, but you're trying to avoid a heat signature.
Yeah, I mean it's very difficult, especially I mean thermals. Some of the military know you can see better at night than you can in the day, because thermals are very have their own problems. If it's very exceptionally cold, batteries draining really quickly.
Hmm.
But essentially, if the thermal's working, it's very hard to invade that, even with covers or the penguin suits. The Russian army's been reduced to penguins walking around Donbass now in these suits. They've been told that will protect them from thermals and the Ukrainians from hitting them. So I mean, it's incredibly different environment now to what it was in 2022, not just because of the drone innovations, but the standard of troops. Both sides, the quality of the troops have gone down with very little training. But I can see Ukraine actually putting a lot more effort into the training and innovations with drones, and the Russians, have got to make those advances. They've got to make their quota, and they're being killed in dozens on the front. Exceptionally devastating. The Ukrainians have been drawing Russians into killing fields, and to the point where we've now got 1.2 million Russian casualties. That it's the war's going longer than the Great Patriotic War. You've got 1.2 million casualties. They've lost dominance of the Black Sea. They've been forced out of Syria. Iran looks like it's on loose legs at the moment.
Hmm.
Russia can't protect its allies in Venezuela. Globally, Russia's struggling, and they're still the propaganda's telling that they're winning and pushing forward when they're making meters. I think I just read somewhere that they're going slower than any military advance since World War One. So they're going snail's pace, and getting lots and lots of people killed doing it. And it doesn't get reported in the press enough.
We're going to talk about independent journalism. And by the way, welcome to being a journalist.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to bring it up on my
Somebody said to me, I've gone from the most dangerous job in the world to the second most dangerous job in the world.
so true. Because we'll go into why that is true. So true. But one of my dearest brother from Kherson, when I go visit Mama, says, "Why are they throwing oxygen about Putin?" Meaning, why, if we've got him on the ropes, does Trump want to throw oxygen to the monster? And I want to get less into like the Trump side. We're going to do that later this week with other guests. We'll just graze it because of Witkoff, and we'll bring that part here. But the idea that America is throwing oxygen to the monster that you guys have worked so hard to take down. As a soldier, tell me about that. Yeah, that's why.
It's all to do with the money, brother. It's all to do with the dengue.
Right.
It is essentially. It does come across that Trump's throwing a lifeline every time Putin gets in the corner or up against the ropes, and I'm certainly an advocate of that. I certainly think that's the case now. Just if we just take this week, we've had Trump and Steve Witkoff in the cabinet office in the White House saying that that there's a ceasefire, and Trump's personally organized this ceasefire, which has not happened at all in the slightest. It's still bombed civilians, hit a passenger train, coaches hit the supplies and logistic routes in Pokrovsk, on the routes to Pokrovsk in Dnipro Oblast. So none of it. There hasn't been a ceasefire. Generally, Putin fires lots of ballistic missiles and drones, and then has a week off, 2 weeks while he stockpiles. That's all that's happened here. Is that probably Putin suggested, "I'll lay off while it's cold," and Trump's gone, "Oh yeah," and he's going, "I've personally negotiated the ceasefire," which has not happened.
Mhm.
And essentially, Witkoff's gone over and spun a yarn that everybody in Ukraine must be hopeful now that we're looking for peace. Well, I've been quite critical and vocal in saying that I'm not sure the word hope is really. We all
Mm.
want peace. We never asked for this in the first place.
Mm.
But if you ask any Ukrainian about Trump, they'll go, I can't even repeat it without probably getting banned off Substack or something. There's no trust for the Trump administration. Nobody's expecting any peace deal to come out of Abu Dhabi, and that's because they know the score. I mean, it's like Trump's from just before his inauguration was trying to stop artillery rounds and artillery rounds coming into Ukraine. He's then, when he's got inaugurated, pulled humanitarian aid from Ukraine. And I'm not against transparency and auditing your NGOs and the people that are working it for you, but he's pulled all the humanitarian aid, which only benefits Russia, because those guys that were working on the demining projects on the front lines and those humanitarian projects where they were getting paid now have to look for work off the front lines. So they're getting pulled back. So generally, everything Trump's done since his inauguration has only ever helped Putin. And to the point where, he wanted a ceasefire, suddenly he'd done a U-turn. So we're now in peace talks where, I'm paraphrasing here, but now we're in peace talks where Putin's allowed to bomb and kill anybody he wants to with no repercussions. And
truce right now where you can hit trains. We have
you can hit trains, you can hit coaches,
hospitals,
which is quite frequent. It gets underreported, but he can do whatever he wants. And then you'll hear Trump regurgitate narratives from Russia and say it's Zelensky that's the problem. And so people here have very little trust or any hope that there's anything going to come out of this, because they've just been pissed on, to be fair, to put it bluntly. So they don't have any hope. And then you've got Witkoff saying, Ukrainians are pretty hopeful now we can deliver a peace deal. Hold on a minute. This is a guy that's never been to Ukraine. So, it's very difficult to really sort of, I think if you ask most Ukrainians, they've got no expectations for these peace talks. And if you ask many of them, they'll just say, we can't be seen to be walking away from these peace talks. So it ceases to be about peace.
To a friend that's a longtime friend of mine in news, that it's easy to say that, Zelensky will meet with these officials in Abu Dhabi, or meetings with the Turkish delegation, etc. And I'm of the theory that that's all great until you tell the commanders in the east that they have to retreat, and they're like, "Не можна." Not doing it.
No, can't do it.
Yeah. Now, my brother's blood is in the ground. My other brother's blood is in the ground. No. You retreat, but we're fighting.
Well, it's bigger than that. I mean, you've got 6 million people now heading the occupied territories. You've got 3 or 4 million who are forced refugees, including myself, where Russia's stolen our family home, and we now have to move to Dnipro. And so I speak with experience of this. And
I have Marines for Bryansk. They want to go home.
Yeah, they want to go home, and the families are there. So Russia's stopping that. It's an imperialist drive. It's ethnic cleansing, a genocide, and what Trump is doing is giving Putin validation, which I think not now, but perhaps later on down the line, this is going to backfire on the Trump administration, and he's not on the right side of history. None of them are. So it's to give validation to someone that's stolen 20,000 Ukrainian children and as an ICC indicted war criminal. Yes, America isn't a signatory to the Rome Statute, but ethics is a major part in anything. And the right and wrong of it all. And unfortunately, the Trump administration, not Americans, but the Trump administration are pro-genocidal and ethnic cleansing if the money's right. And that's where we sit with the world at the moment. Everything's become transactional for the Trump administration, to the point where they want to undermine, the people that are supporting Ukraine,
Hmm.
which then, which we're going to come to in a bit with Interpol, is the reason I've cancelled my trip to America, because
Hmm.
essentially you have to have trust in the government. And at the moment, Americans don't have trust in their own government. The midterms look like they're going to crash for Trump.
Mm.
Even his ardent supporters and a lot of the Republican Party now are like, what the fuck? Bipartisans, you'll hear that word quite a bit,
Hmm.
you know, now in American politics because
Hmm.
of what Trump's doing. So it is a very difficult time for America. Russia used that for their propaganda, and they're quite content in that. But when the midterms come, and if Trump crashes, the whole world of Putin could change very, very quickly.
I see there's some people wanting some questions at the bottom. So if you do, log them in here, and then when I get a chance, I'll roll your question and comment up in the space. Or I'm so used to Twitter to our conversation here. I want to stick to that for a minute to say that a year ago at the media center there was the "What Will Come Next" Trump 2.0, and a former minister of defense that had been in as a Ukrainian had dealt with America's Pentagon level under Trump, then Biden, and then now Trump was coming back in. There was this idea, well, he's a businessman, so we can expect such and such and such. And I kind of tuned out the rest of what he said because
Yeah,
I, just,
yeah.
I just did this number. And then, of course, the media center knows me, so they're like, "Oh, here we go. It's going to be the Trump Russia expert versus our MOD guy." And finally, an hour later, they hand me the microphone. Мене звати Christopher, мене питання про це. Він не businessman, він ніколи не сказав правду. Так? And they're like, if he doesn't speak the truth, he never speaks the truth, and he's not a businessman. Why are we calculating this as a businessman? I take no joy in being correct that what I said was true. I knew I had to say it, and I mean no disrespect to the person who was giving me his opinion at that time. But I knew a few people here in the city that are also very business oriented only, and they sort of like how MAGA believes he's a business guy. They were caught up in the same mindset. And one of the other ones that I knew months later, when a few more consequences were rolling in, I said, "So Dima, що думаєш зараз про Trump?" Like, okay, so yeah, the mood changed when the reality of cutting off aid, cutting off intelligence, insulting Zelensky, insulting Ukrainians, saying things like, even just the other day with the energy truce, I was on the phone with him and it was nice. He was so nice. It hits every fucking
This
like,
is a guy that waxed 25,000 civilians, including women and children, in Mariupol. Welcome to my world. I just sit there and go, I just like, what? you know, this is
right,
a guy that imprisoned kids, train drivers in prisons, and I was in with them. And you just have to sit there and just the reason I got into journalism is because of that. It's
right.
because of the validation and the normality that Trump's given Putin. That if somebody could spend 5 minutes in my shoes in a
Right.
prison in Donetsk, and see the cruelty and the barbarism that
Mhm.
Russia did to Mariupol and the people and inhabitants,
Mhm.
setting up Nazi style filtration camps in East Ukraine,
Mhm.
which conducted war crimes, which I've still got the scar. I was electrocuted, stabbed in the leg. I have the medical records, the scars, the pictures taken at the time. I was like 60 kilos when I come home because we weren't being fed. I
Sure.
looked like I'd been in Auschwitz or a Japanese war camp by the time I'd got home. So all this is documented, these war crimes. Yet
Right.
Trump's given him validation, and the reason that I'm not being in the military. I think you don't, not subservient's not the right word, but you don't really have a political opinion because you're in the military and you serve your country.
Mm.
I'm certainly now a activist, certainly now somebody that's come out of his shell because of the way I was treated. Russia made me Russophobic. They stole my house, killed my friends, tortured me, stuck me on a sham trial, give me the death penalty for being a Nazi mercenary and a terrorist. Yet I
Mhm.
never left the country I had legal residency in. I was fighting in the military, not a paramilitary or a terrorist group or this is what Russia is. They will fabricate the truth and give you a trial by public opinion to justify tomorrow's narrative, and that's what Russia does. Russia made me who I am today. So when I hear the word Russophobia, I just start laughing.
Yeah, and I wanna address one thing in what you said there. You went through that from April until September 22nd, 2022, and one of the phrases we use in the activism circle here for defenders, that's my specialty, is "time is life."
Mm.
Um, I have a friend, whose father was a Marine, a 36th Marine, Alexander Savov, and he was released earlier this year finally, and he died a few months ago because it had done way too much damage to him by the time he came home. So the need to act promptly and diligently is a must. Let's address that before we go to the Interpol discussion.
Uh, Certainly, it's a difficult one, really. Certainly, the way I was treated meant that I was angry.
Mm,
So it drove me. I don't know what other people's, drivers are. It certainly kickstarted me into sort of the activist role because of the injustice that was done to me. I mean, when I came back home and I'd seen that I was on Solyov's program, and they were deciding whether they should hang me or shoot me or send the bullet to my mum. This is Russian TV. I mean, I was
right.
just sitting there. I had no idea. I didn't know any of that was going on at the time. This is a country that's deciding whether they want to hang me or shoot me to a public audience before I'd even gone to trial. And this is all run by Russian state media, RT. So, it isn't a nice country. It isn't a country that's um, essentially got democratic values and a justice. It has a justice system, but it's nothing like ours to a degree. I mean, it's so corrupt. It's Putin's system.
Right.
So those were my kickstart drivers into a world which was quite alien to me. Being a soldier, I'd spent large time of my life staying under the radar. I didn't want to be in the media. Otherwise, that was my job out the way. I wasn't interested in social media or Instagram or anything like that. So I think that's pushed me into the era I'm in now. I can't speak for other people, but certainly I didn't want to be a victim. I didn't want to be someone who was going
Amen.
to, spend the rest of my life going, well, I made a big mistake, and they electrocuted me and beat me, and I'm now I don't have PTSD. I sleep like a baby. I'm pretty confident in my ability to argue my case, and so I mean, that was a perfect setup for me to go into journalism, to be able to report on an area which I was probably one of a handful of people living in Donbass before the full-scale invasion
Mhm.
who was not Ukrainian. I was in the right place at the wrong time. So I think that's pushed me to where I am now. Certainly I get a lot of flack from pro-Russian supporters. You're a grifter. I wish I did make money. I wish somebody paid me £100,000 per podcast. I wish they did. You know,
Right.
the money isn't what there is no money in this side. If you're Russian, you can get 100 Russian support. You can get £100,000 a podcast. Not for Ukraine, unfortunately.
Get a great propaganda system that's that way. I can say I've been 4 years on my 6th military class, and there's no Ukrainian government fund to do any of this. I huff up and down the street on 30.
No, You're breaking up a bit. Your mic's breaking up.
right.
Your mic's breaking up. I don't know whether mine's
Oh,
right. Yeah, you're breaking up a bit there. I couldn't
so
hear
it's
you.
a data system.
Ah,
Yeah.
so apple pie
Apple
and
pie.
fries.
So I want to say to our listeners right now and our viewers to make sure you might already be following Shaun's. If you're already his follower, get on a paid subscription, even if it's $5 a month, because if there's enough people at $5 a month, then the sustenance to just focus on the story instead of focusing on finances is going to be a big deal. And Shaun and I have had this discussion, and I'm here to be his advocate for that, to say if he's doing this for us, he gives us invaluable experience that we cannot reproduce artificially. So it is in our interest to make sure he has that sustenance. That means when we're done with this, take this and do the same thing. Go find other people and say, we have an invaluable resource that isn't filtered through the New York Times editorial or the Guardian editorial. Actually, Guardian's pretty good with some people I know, but whichever paper it is, it's not filtered through that. He's going to be able to work with you directly. And that's really up to you, the viewer, to help sustain that. We are going to have to get to independent media, which is like tomorrow night, I'll bringing Brian Karim, that's the topic tomorrow. But partially it's a topic now because if you can do this, then we gain an invaluable resource.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I watched a Jake. I toyed with it for ages,
Hmm.
and I was looking at maybe doing something in the media.
Hmm.
I didn't feel quite confident in doing it, and I think it was Jake Bro that said I watched an episode of him, and he just said, "Just grab a camera, do something," and I was like, "Yeah, fuck it."
Yeah.
You know, what could go wrong? Next
Right.
thing I know, I'd been approached. I wrote an article for CEPA and about Pokrovsk, and suddenly everything changed. I was being tapped up for interviews, regular interviews. Suddenly, I was writing a Substack. Then I was spoke with an online magazine who said they were quite happy to um, I was going to write for them, London Loves Business, and
Mhm.
suddenly I was then writing articles, and I suddenly became a journalist. And then I had some stuff published in the Sun in the UK, and
Mhm.
biggest selling newspaper in the UK. Whatever you think of it, and the truth's still the truth. I was ecstatic. They wanted to publish some of my stuff. So, and suddenly overnight, I'd become a real somebody that knew about what was happening in Ukraine, and my articles started taking off. So it was inevitable at the end that I would end up doing things for Ukraine and becoming a journalist, a war correspondent, foreign correspondent. I mean,
Right.
my English
So
teacher would be like,
let's talk about that. Um, we had a conversation recently, and this issue of Interpol red notices came up, and this is the way to confront it: is to use that media tool.
it is, because it's very difficult to get evidence unless you're the BBC or a good investigative journalist. This is quite new to me, this subject. So I know there are good people out there. So when I saw the BBC do a report on Interpol, it's something we already knew was happening.
Hmm.
Certainly when I was exchanged, Aiden Aslin was finding it difficult to get to Ukraine. He couldn't get past Poland or Moldova before being sent back to the UK. So there was obviously some sort of notice on him. And unfortunately, I was planning a trip in May to America to talk to journalists and media.
Hmm.
Uh, I'd struggled to get a visa for well over 12 months into America, which being Brit is quite strange, really. But I got some friends to look into it, some congressmen and people like that, and they offered to be sponsors. So eventually, they put pressure on whoever it was to get my visa, and suddenly I got a visa over a year. Eventually got that, and then I had to cancel it because of what was going on with the Trump's administration, sort of moving allegiance to Russia, and you see what's going on with ICE and border control
Yeah.
in America. Now, I've got to be clear on this. I don't think for 1 minute I would be extradited from America and sent to Russia to finish out my term. Now, the backstory is, for those that don't know, I was pulled from Mariupol, illegally trialed, which I'm now taking the Russian state to court for in Donetsk.
Right.
I was never left the country I had legal status in. I was trialed as a Nazi mercenary and a terrorist, and Russia fully backed this, puppet court in Ukraine. Um, Therefore, an article came out with the BBC saying that their investigation and they'd been given papers showing that Russia was abusing Interpol. We'd known that. I'd known the problems with Aiden. The problem was not I would get to America, they'd stop me on the border, they'd send me to Russia. It was never going to be the case. I never thought that would ever happen. However, you don't know there's a red notice or a notice on your name until you've traveled.
Right.
And that can cause you a lot of problems. Work, home life, detention. You've then got the stigma. Russia will use that as propaganda. He was stopped. He was not allowed into America. And that made me then start to realize I needed to reevaluate my travel plans because Putin's got Trump round his little finger, and Trump's just aligning himself more and more with Putin. It got to the point where, well, can you really trust the government to do the right thing? Did I ever think that I would be saying that about America, that I can't go to America?
Last 20 minutes when we keep grazing so close to that topic, I keep wanting to say, all of the calculations before this last year never involved the calculation that it's America that becomes the weapon.
Yeah, and that's a situation I'm in. The law doesn't protect people like me anymore. I've never done anything wrong. I'm not a terrorist. I never left the country. I didn't go invading Russia. Yet I've got a sentence recognized by Russia that I'm a Nazi and a mercenary and a terrorist. To the point where I can't even go and reclaim our family home because Russia has stolen it. So this all plays into, do I really want to risk going to America, being stopped by border control, having them stop me and say there's a notice from Interpol on your name, that then goes through the papers, affects my family, my wife, stops me from working. I now have to sit there and think, well, I can go to Canada and do the same job. I could talk to you. You're American. You've got assets. Do I really need to go to America now? It shouldn't be the case. I should be allowed to go there without having to worry about Russia enacting an Interpol because I've had a puppet court jail me for something I haven't done, in a war. And Interpol are, being used by Russia. Those that don't know, Interpol can't really get involved in political matters or military matters. They're a criminal.
There's a particular passage in it was called the military. I put it in my article today. It's basically if it's an active military member, even with Russians, they won't get involved. So Russians are allowed to run free. And Media Initiative for Human Rights, a great activist group, or really an NGO research group, they've documented this problem: how Russian war criminals can travel, and Interpol won't intercede. So the fact that they're interfering with foreign defenders and Ukrainians, which is when we were doing that report, I gave you basically a list of different folks like Rafat Chabarov, who's the head of the Crimean Majlis, and Mustafa Zhemilev. These folks basically have red notices on them because of Russia. And it's impossible that an elder like Mustafa Zhemilev has a red notice that Interpol can, deal with, knowing that, he is on record as the longest hunger strike, like a 306 days hunger strike, the leader of the Crimean people. Yeah. And he's treated, this way, but a Russian soldier can travel through Europe and be just fine.
They are. I mean, as a journalist now, I'm in the second most dangerous job. As I said, it's like they've already sanctioned the cast of Ukraine the latest, and my friend Jerome Starkey from The Sun, who's the defense correspondent, Kalun, here in Ukraine, he's already been sanctioned. So this is uh, a Russian government that if they don't like what you're saying, will just sanction you, and suddenly
Yeah,
you become a terrorist or an extremist,
yeah.
or and essentially I never left the country I had legal status in, and suddenly I'm got a death penalty in Russia, stopped going in across the American border because I've got this death penalty in Russia. Russia doesn't have the death penalty, thank God, but Donetsk People's Republic did. So,
Mhm.
and they recognize the courts. So I'd have to spend the rest of my life in a gulag if America did decide they want to send me to Russia, which I do think is highly unlikely.
Right.
But it is the the pause in the life, the problems it causes. I won't be able to get to Europe. I can't get back to Ukraine because I've got a red notice on me now. So is it worth, doing that, and traveling to America and just putting myself in that position when I could do all the stuff I need to do from here anyway? No, it's not. And I do love America. I love going to America. I love the South. I spent a lot of time in New Orleans and Atlanta and never came home. So it is a place in my heart, America. So it's really sad to see what's happening, with ICE and what's going on in America. It's not the land of the free anymore. It's definitely not. It's definitely lost its place in the world, and I think Trump's really escalated that. No doubt, he's
And
definitely
I say, hey,
speeded that up.
calling occupied territory. How are you? I'm calling from the free world.
So yeah, yeah. Well, I'm in the freest
Я
country.
тоже за правду, bro.
I'm in the freest country. I'm a little, my president here is the leader of the free world at the moment. So
But they say we'll be
Ukraine.
living under martial law. I go, really? So things will be quiet at night.
Yeah, that's it. I know. There's no drunks around. Everybody's in bed by 12. Martial law ain't so bad.
Yeah, it's actually it's an interesting concept to listen to Americans talk about martial law under Trump, which would be a serious situation. I'm not trying to make. I laugh when the irony gets too thick. It's a part
Me
of
too. Yeah, it's the only
yeah,
way to be.
rich.
Yeah.
But they'll say, we'll be under martial law, and it's like, but I live under martial law, and it basically creates a parameters by which collaborators are more easily seen, saboteurs are more easily seen, and there was an adjustment in that first year for a lot of people, but eventually we all like, and we're not herded. It's not cattle like where we're just, oh, let's go
No.
little simple stuff and we go home. It's just changed how people operate on a certain level, but you're especially during blackouts, your days are it's probably safer for us on a certain level because we collectively work together. I don't see the type of
Yeah.
I know when I think about what would martial law be under Trump, I can't imagine that part because I've been in 4 years of martial law and none of that happens here.
No, I agree with you. It's if you're out, somebody reminds you that you've got to get back before the curfew.
I don't have a press badge now.
Yeah, yeah. I'm told that. So it's like there's 6 million press badges. Everyone goes, oh, if you got a press badge, you can stay out past curfew.
Yeah.
It's like, but no,
There
I mean,
are
it's like
45, there are at least above 45,000 now.
it is. I mean, it is. People support each other with that, and it's not like it's a bind. I think the only people that are struggling and wanting people to stay out longer are the bars, the clubs, the restaurants, and the service industry. But essentially, I don't see anybody speak with animosity about martial law. Not
I don't
once
know
in
bars are
several years. 4 years, I've been here. I've not heard one person sort of really complain about martial law.
No, I'm like the babusi now. I yell out the window, "Go home!" It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Someone's having a fight out in the street, argument from drinking at their apartment. It was like, "Go home, let's shut up,
Yeah, tijo.
grown." Yeah, yeah, takes two. Does it tijo?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm at a point where I can speak a bit, and then people think I'm fluent, and they say something, and I go, "Huh?" You know.
That the other day, I find this part beautiful. This is the part that brings joy back in. And where are you from? Mani. Yeah, я за Техасу, я живу тут 4 роки. Wait, so you're from America? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so see, you're speaking Ukrainian to the lady buying your stuff, so I wasn't sure, but eventually we get to talking like about being a foreigner living here, and that blending in part is joyful when you get that bond that says, so you're really like here with us. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So that feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I get that followed by, I speak my best, Suzik, and, I speak to the cab driver something, and then you guarantee that when we're on our way, he says, "Where are you from?" You
Yeah, yeah, right.
know, and you go, "Well, actually,
Vinny,
I'm from
Vinny.
London. I'm
Right.
London originally." And then they go, "Oh, London is the capital of Great Britain." And you just end up, having a bit of a laugh. Really? Still? Thank God for that. It's like, but I mean, they
My
quick to.
we
I
have
was
a
My
problem.
Russia was never going to get me out of the problems in Mariupol. If I was
Right.
captured, it's not going to be like the Great Escape. I couldn't sit there and speak, Russian and expect to get away. I was the guy that was going, "Good morning, good morning." Oh, you know. So my Russian is clunky. I still speak with a London accent. But yeah,
Cussing
I
you.
am
I cuss
I still talk to
out.
people and say I'm a Russian speaker from East Ukraine,
Right.
just born in London.
Well, I cuss in Ukrainian with a certain fire when I speak, so usually the fuel system for the person I'm talking to went up quite a bit by the end of the conversation. I'll basically like just totally shit talk Trump or Putin or something. And when I'm done, they're like, so
He
let's see.
knows all the bad words.
Oh, lots of good bad words. So
Lots
words.
of bad
I know you have
words.
questions and comments. Make sure you put them in here. But the first thing, this is my 4-year anniversary this last weekend. And it was 4 years ago yesterday that my best friend Andrei Nico, after a wonderful meal and some horilka, I have to teach you a very important song. You have to know this very important song we all sing here. So it's Putin Huilo. Okay, Putin Huilo, la 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 la. Okay, Bichi horilka. Putin Huilo, la 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 la. So the first New Year's after, it was a really difficult night that night. One of my friends from Bucha, his father died that night. Some things were going on. Plus, we had blackout and then some drones. And I was really in a dark place about that. It was a dark winter. And then I had my window open and it echoes forward and back. Putin, hello, la 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 la. I have a Zoom recorder out. I'm like, Putin, and it goes just like rivers away and back and rivers away and back. And it's not like that now because we've kind of gone through past the Stefania phase, as I call it. But that camaraderie where we all know the soccer chant, the football chant that
Yeah, yeah. The
puts it
military
too
do
low.
it the best when they were marching down Christiatic going,
Yeah.
"Putin, for law, la, 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 la," I mean,
Well,
that is some inspiring stuff, and they still keep doing it now.
you get to the front checkpoints and you're like, yeah, puts in Huilo. Oh, puts in Huilo. You get a patch. You're Ukrainian, like, bro, man, what's up with the patches, man? Like,
It's the password to get through a block post. That's
yeah,
the
you're
part.
right. So again, to our viewers, I know there were some people who had mentioned they had some comments, so make sure you have them. Oh, wait. Let's see here. I see one of them. Let me go back. Hold on. I see Sheila.
Naomi's on. I saw Naomi. She's a real big supporter of the charity. And
Yeah,
hi, Naomi. See you on there.
there you go. So if you have a comment, just put it down there. We can read it together. We can make sure we answer your question. Let's talk a little bit about sticking on the Interpol issue. Um, Colombian fighters, uh,
Yeah.
or Latino fighters, they've been fucked with already. And the vulnerability to some of those guys who, instead of being America or Britain, there's some that have more complicated history or more complicated countries that have some dynamics. So let's speak up for them a little bit right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. I don't come into only when I come to Kyiv. I sort of meet Colombians. I don't really come into them contact daily, but
Yeah.
certainly I would say if I would took the Russians I saw in captivity in the Russian prisoner war camps in West Ukraine. Certainly there were some of the same groups and countries that were fighting on the Russian side. So Colombian, South Americans,
True.
Indians, Nepalese, Sri Lankans,
Yeah.
lots from Africa that are coming out now to support Russia. So, and then those guys were, for those that don't know, I went to a prisoner of war camp in West Ukraine to really try and promote an exchange of soldiers that weren't born in either Russia or Ukraine that are being held on both sides. And what became very quick to understand was that Russia wasn't exchanging. I mean, now they're not exchanging anybody, as Zelensky's commenting, but they weren't exchanging. They were only exchanging ethnic white Russians and leaving the foreign element into it. I don't like the word foreign fighters because under the Geneva Conventions, it doesn't matter where you're from. If you're fighting for an army and you're fighting you're flagged for a state, your background has no implications on your
Sure.
status as a prisoner of war. I wasn't given that status by the Russians.
Real quick,
I
for
was not treated as a prisoner of war.
the mercenary is actually defined even in international law. A disproportionate amount of payment for participants, but when you're under contract, essentially you're like every other Ukrainian soldier, and that distinction is very clear here. But our viewers may not have heard that or not elucidated in the West very well in Western press. And when I had the mercenaries that were from Nepal, there was one guy from Kyiv, a couple guys from Africa. My question, I had two questions. One for the coordination headquarters is, can you explain the difference between a contract soldier and a mercenary here? And then my second question, I think you'll appreciate why I asked this certain motherfucker. Well, are you here of your own to speak freely today? Yeah. Just basically calmly said, yeah, of course. And
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I wasn't part of. I mean, you're on a real problem if you're Wagner because it's a private military contractor, and if you're going in to invade a neighboring country, which is a democratically elected country, then you are technically a mercenary and not entitled to be in a POW.
right.
If you're a paramilitary group and you're invading Ukraine, you are essentially like Rusich. You are essentially not a government soldier. You are a paramilitary group. Therefore, you're not entitled to being a POW. Ukraine doesn't do that. Essentially, if you're Wagner, you're on a sticky wicket, but they still treat you as a POW. They may charge you as being a mercenary, but you are essentially still given the same conditions as a POW because I saw them. They're in facilities. They've got access to showers, medical facilities. They've got a shop on the prison camp. The Red Cross and humanitarian aid groups are allowed to audit those prisons. And they're a mixture of people from guys from Sri Lanka and India through to, ethnic Russians and Wagner, PMC and Rusich groups. So they're all in these prisons together. Essentially, I wasn't given that choice. I was never allowed access to any humanitarian aid groups, including Red Cross. I was allowed to speak to my consulate or the British embassy out in Russia. I wasn't allowed access to pretty much. I was allowed to walk occasionally for an hour every day. I wasn't even being fed for 60 days, which is why I looked so bad when I went to trial. So your life expectancy in a Russian prison anyway, whether you're military or not, is probably, I would suspect, about 5 years because of the harsh conditions there.
Right.
Essentially, I was in general population, which made it even more dangerous. So, I wasn't given that. So when we went to meet these people, it was really important to give them and follow the Geneva Conventions and talk to them if they wanted to talk to us, which many of the Russians wanted to talk to us more than the journalists because they realized we were ex-prisoners in the Russian side. So just wanted to break up the day and come and have a chat with us. So, and that was where we had some interesting experiences bonding with people at Wagner. One of the guys there was sort of saying, well, I was in prison for 15 years for murder. And he said, well, you've been in a Russian prison. What would you have done if you were me? And I was like, probably the same thing, to be
Right.
honest. It's a horrendous conditions in Russian prisons, and I'd probably want to get out too. And if it meant I was going to get paid a shit ton of money to kill Ukrainians, I would have probably done it. But I'm not on that side. I know how bad the conditions are. It might sound odd that I'm saying that, but I know how bad the conditions are in prison. So they're sort of forced to fight, really, or die in a prison for the rest of your life. It's the way they go. So, and that's what Russia really does, is it sort of pays them a huge amount of money to go back to the front line to fight for Russia. It's just lucky some of these guys were captured rather than killed. So,
The fact that you would that I think was extremely important. I had been doing work, as you know, for a while, and soldier you. So that I as a journalist.
I can't hear you, buddy. You're breaking up.
Oh, we got it ringing back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, I don't know why it's ringing back. Okay, so the fact that you and Aiden did this is very important, your personal experience. Um, give me a sense of like what that's like for you guys to be sitting there. I mean, it may be hard to like remove yourself from being who you've been and being involved, but I think it's something different for you than I could possibly done. No way I could.
I don't know. I didn't find it a problem. It was, I never wanted to be the victim, as I said. So I never looked at myself as being a victim. I certainly didn't look at the people. I didn't want to make their life hell in the prison. I didn't want to make them suffer any more than they're suffering. Most of them I felt sorry for them because they were brainwashed. So they didn't really understand the geopolitical situation. They didn't really understand the war. They were over there for the cash and the money.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take a lot of what they say with a pinch of salt, because everyone in captivity is either a chef or a medic. Nobody wants to be the guy pulling the trigger or, accepting money. So you have to take a bit of what they say with a pinch of salt. But there were some similarities that I really did take home with me. One of them was a lot of them, Russia had relaxed the visa laws so much that they knew what they were bringing over, and they knew that eventually a lot of these guys won't go back home to their countries once the visas run out. They'd overstay the visas, try and get legal work. Some of them fall down criminal paths. Most of the guys, the foreign fighters that we talked to, were essentially criminals in prisons. One of them said, "Yeah, I was selling drugs to make ends meet, and I got caught, and I was in a Russian prison, and so they give me the lifeline out." And so you understand that being older as well, you can sort of understand how they've ended up there. One guy just sort of said, "I lived in Mogadishu, dude." What? Nobody wanted me in UK or Germany, and Russia was the only place that I could go to sort of better my life. And you sort of go,
Right.
I could sort of understand that a bit. And he was duped into a lot of it. I could sort of believe some people. There were some professional fighters from Sierra Leone and places like that who didn't lie. They just sort of said, "Yeah, I've got an army background. I came over because the contract and the money was good,"
Mm.
and they didn't lie. Some were just outright lying. You could tell from the word go. So it was an eye-opener. I certainly didn't want to make their life more miserable. I understood where they were coming from. I had a great interview with a Wagner guy because I understood why he left, and he opened up to me. There was definitely a prestige about being in Wagner, which is kind of scary considering, it's a group that was founded by Uklin, who's an out-and-out Nazi, named after Hitler's favorite composer,
Mm.
of all things, which is a private military contractor,
Mm.
who's, these guys are just brought into that lifestyle. I mean, it's a private military contractor that came in to invade Ukraine, yet, somehow that's overlooked with Trump and the administration, and Rusich Group, another Nazi outfit, who's, who's invaded Ukraine, and this is a country that's trying to denazify Ukraine with more Nazis. It's like none of the narratives stack up anymore. And I think we're winning this battle, to be honest. I think I see a lot more social media. I see a lot more challenges to the Trump administration. I see a lot more stuff on Twitter now challenging those Russian propaganda narratives. And I think there's hope in the future, that we can sort of challenge that, especially since
here's what I did to appreciate Red Cross. The Ukrainian fans have protested ahead, and I don't know. I said, we have access to the captured Russian mercenaries.
we're catching every third word again, mate. Your mic or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There's no. I mean, it's straight up mic. Tell me when it cuts in. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. So the Red Cross, the head of the Red Cross here, I asked him, do you have any problems speaking to the captured Russian with the AFP? Oh, no. Like, really crazy how he, of course, Vichai. The fact that the Cross makes it extremely clear that there's never.
Yeah, I've heard reports there are some prisoners that are not accessible to the Red Cross, but I could imagine those being the Chinese and the North Koreans. They're quite sensitive. Certainly, when I went there, I didn't see them. They weren't in with the general population, and I was kind of hoping to talk to one of those. But yeah, they're pretty much kept separate. But certainly, I think I can't tell you how I know, but certainly the Brits and the Americans that are held over the other side in Russia are getting access to hopefully some humanitarian aid and some diplomatic chats. So there's definitely some sort of benefits now, or some sort of improvement to when I was in captivity in those early days of the war. How much I don't know. It'll be interesting if they do a prisoner of war swap. I think if there was genuine, if there was genuine intent from Russia to want a peace process, I think the first thing they could do is do a massive prisoner swap. And I think that would set a precedent. They're interested in peace now. It's failing for them. They can't get momentum. They've realized that. So, we're going to do a prisoner swap as a good intent start to peace talks. Unfortunately, that's not come about yet. Hopefully, we can only hope that, in the next couple of days, something like that might be arranged. But, unless something like that, I mean, considering that there's peace talks and he's still bombing everybody, I find that extremely odd to a degree. So I've been outspoken with that. You can't have peace talks when someone's still bombing the very people that it's just not going to work. It's just a quick fix.
So this is what peace looks like right now.
Is that now? Is it?
That's right now.
Okay, I've got to go.
So when I hear peace, I don't relate to these terms with the our
they came in last night, to be fair.
Air raid map, and yeah, mostly red. In fact, alarms will go off here short, which people always say,
yeah.
Sure. I go, what am I going to see?
They came in last night, to be fair. So it was short lived, whatever it was. So so I'm just having a glass of wine tonight and chilling out. It's been it came in last night, and it's business as usual, I said. So it hasn't stopped. My mum even phoned me and sort of said, "Oh, there's a ceasefire." I said, "No, there's no ceasefire." It's so I had to sort of educate people at home, and then I thought, well, I might put out a little video of what's actually happening here and write an article of what's going on. So but yeah, no, there's been no ceasefire as such. It's definitely a propaganda stunt probably pushed through by Putin, and Trump's just swallowed it whole. And certainly I don't think there's any ceasefire. Certainly now there's not. So,
and we'll see what happens. Again, I'm viewers. If you have questions, you go 10 more minutes. Basically, or sorry, 30 our time. We want to hear you. So while they do that, and I can't really sure what it is, I'll do. I want to address kind of, I think people in America are about sticking to and the mindset here to get to the next phase. Any bits of advice?
I didn't hear any of that. I got 3 words.
Oh, okay.
All I heard was advice. I figured other people might be able to hear, and I can't. But I got every 3
I'm not
words.
sure. It's echoing back. Advice for Americans struggling right now: stick together.
I think the most important advice is really to get your source of information from the ground. I double check and challenge, even me, challenge everything, because I think that's the way forward. You've got a lot of mainstream media who are not really reporting what's going on the ground. They're not in country full time. They send people every couple of weeks, every month or so. So they don't really have a grounding of what's going on. They're in and out. So really you want your sources from the ground here. And then to really corroborate those sources with other sources and get yourself 2 or 3 information streams coming in where you can justify what you're thinking and confirm those reports. So it's very difficult with all the Russian propaganda. You've got to ask yourself, why is Russian propaganda all on X now when they need a VPN to get out of Russia? And X is banned in Russia. For some reason, they all want to go on X. Nobody in the West is making a mad dash for Russian social media.
Right.
So you've got to ask yourself, why is X and Western platform filled with pro-Russian propaganda? That's because it's probably not a Russian in Russia. It's like paid shills and just people that are second generation Russians who want to be in Russia, but don't go back and fight for their country. They're definitely not on the front lines in Ukraine. I mean, you can take your pick. It's just bizarre how we've got ourselves into this position where Russia's allowed to infiltrate Western social media, yet all Western social media is banned in Russia. Yeah. You've even got Kirill Dmitriev, Putin's right-hand person, who's slags off the West and then flies into America and goes water skiing in Miami. It's like just bizarre set of things going on at the moment. Kirill Dmitriev needs a VPN to get out and speak on X.
I got the new cans on. How's the audio better?
Absolutely much better, yeah.
So I've done a lot of work here with these, but we'll go with these for right now for the last parts. So we have a question here. Someone said, did we notice that Putin had picked Witkoff and the Russian connections involved with Witkoff?
Social profiling. That's the bit where America's coming unstuck with the dumbest people that's been elected, sending dumber people. If you're gonna, let's put it another way, if you're gonna elect a second or third-rate president, you're gonna have fourth or fifth-rate diplomats go out and do the stuff. Putin's been head of Russia for 25 years. He's an ex-KGB agent who knows exactly how to manipulate people.
A mediocre human guy.
And then you send in Steve Witkoff, who's dumb as fuck.
And my article, no, it's okay. Пиздец Российской Федерации. So if you have time, I have an article where I picked apart that Witkoff is not only is he operating illegally, we have actually a history in America at the founding where these rogue diplomats were being thrown out during Federalist Papers era, and they reeled all that in. They said we can't have that. That was the whole point of the appointments clause, is to keep that kind of ad hoc diplomacy from happening.
It's they would have socially profiled him. They would have picked him because he's an easy target. They would have certainly. I mean, Witkoff himself has been caught on transcripts coaching Russia's elite on how to manipulate the president of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Why he's still in a job, I have no idea. Because he's not accountable to anybody other than Trump. So, so this is essentially where you sit, and there's no, they're not an honest broker in this now. I hate to say America, but Trump administration was elected. They're not an honest broker in this.
Mm-hmm.
It's business interest. He's already been caught coaching the Russians how to manipulate Trump. He's clearly never set foot in Ukraine. Pushes an agenda. I think this weekend made a lot of people feel very sick because it was like someone lying to his boss to get a pat on the back.
Right.
And it wasn't any truth in that whatsoever. This is after a weekend where Ukraine's had coach attacks, civilians killed, miners killed, passenger train attacked, houses in Dnipro artillery, and there's meant to be a ceasefire. Yet, Witkoff's in there giving it all that everybody in Ukraine's going to have hope that we're going to get a peace deal. And in the very same sentence says, we've almost finished the security guarantees. We've almost finished an economical plan. Nothing to show for it, but apparently we're meant to be happy that, there's a deal on the table. So after, more civilians were killed this weekend. So, I mean, it's getting worse, I think, for Trump. I definitely see more animosity towards the administration. Certainly, Witkoff, who's been called out from the very moment he set foot and started negotiating this so-called peace deal. And where the hell is Rubio? Where
subdued and useless?
Where is he? He should be the guy that's doing this, not Witkoff. It's
right.
like, where the fuck is Rubio?
Yeah, the idea that it's turned into a real estate deal, and they always talk in these terms, is first off, even then they're not good at that. Even if I was to say that was the objective, the other thing I said in that briefing about Trump 2.0 was that he hasn't negotiated anything in front of us that comes home with anything. What did he come home with from Kim Jong-un? Nothing. What did he come up with the Taliban? Nothing. He gave it all away, collapsed the state security services. So he's not even a good negotiator on that level. He has no deal to sign off on.
No, and I've said in February last year, they come and they don't even understand the culture. They send people that don't speak the language. They have no idea of the war and what's going on. He's totally out of his depth, negotiating with a former KGB agent and special services of Russia. He's so out of his depth dealing with that. I mean, it's bizarre. He's never even been to Ukraine, probably for that reason. Yet, could speak for Ukraine. I mean, it's just a bizarre set of circumstances from Witkoff that's, I think, generally has made a lot of people very sick here with what he said at the weekend. Unrealistic view of what's actually happened in Ukraine. So how can you hold any hope for any sort of decent peace talks? You can't. It's not about peace anymore. It's about,
well, what about the evolution? Yeah, what about the evolution of the Ukrainian side and how they've adapted? What do you think of that?
I think we stand in better stead than the Russians. I mean, if you, I'm going to use somebody else's phrase. Russia was meant to be the second most powerful army in the world. Now they resorted to looking like penguins in Donbass. And that's where you sit with it. I mean, this is meant to be the second most powerful army in the world. They've lost dominance of the Black Sea, lost Syria. They've managed to get 60 kilometers from where they started the war 4 years ago, to Pokrovsk, and they're still struggling. They've, even with support from the Russian Federation, the Springboard platform in Belarus, North Korean regulars, ballistics from from North Korea, drones from Iran, and they're still struggling to even take Donbass and Donetsk Oblast in 11 years. So we've overestimated Russia's capabilities, and I think Putin's in a situation where he needs an off ramp at some point now. I think it's taken nearly 4 years to get to a point where, members of parliament.
How do you land the shit show you started?
How do you land it? And I think he's now in this point of where, autocratic governments get very brittle at this point, where people in parliament are now starting to call into question the leadership. And this is not new. You've got to remember, Prigozhin was saying the same thing and got, 200 kilometers or whatever from Moscow before he called it off. So this is not a new thing. This could turn really quickly for Putin and have another Gorbachev moment where, he's on a sabbatical and having a break, and suddenly you've got, an interim government in charge because, Putin can't find an off-ramp. So
absolutely,
we're at a point where we need to keep the pressure on Russia now. I've been saying for quite a while that, there's been a power shift. Whatever way you look at it, I don't think we're going to go into Mariupol. I'd set up defense positions in the next, 6 months to a year. However, nobody could argue that we're in the same place as we were in 2022. We're now firing 300 or 400 drones into Russia daily, ballistic missiles. We're now putting blackouts in Moscow. Russia don't have dominance in the Black Sea. We're taking ground back. This is not going Russia's way. This is not an army that's winning, and their propaganda is now pushing really damage limitations because it can't sell a win. And Russia's really looking for its next win, and it's not materializing. And then when the midterms come, it may never materialize. So you might end up having Russia.
That's true. Yeah. Russia, if you remember, Kherson was liberated right after the midterms.
So you could end up with Russia actually looking at a peace deal, and that's even more dangerous, because Russia will only look at a peace deal or a ceasefire if they think they could reorganize, get the troop levels back up, and have a second stab at Kyiv. So these security guarantees are pivotal in this, because Russia will come back. And nobody in Ukraine thinks this war is going to end, even if there's a ceasefire, because they know Russia's going to attack with its clandestine units, try and put in a puppet government, and keep going after this, even if there is a peace deal. So Ukrainians don't really look at this as a peace deal at all. It's just a stop in the war.
Right.
Because Putin won't stop. He's got a history of coming back and postponing what he initially started. So, I doubt the only way you could really stop Russia is if you economical collapse and you push them into oblivion and you make them stop. That's the only way you could do that, because they won't. He'll drive Russia into the ground before he stops and kill another million Russians to try and achieve his goals. And I think, Ukraine's ability to understand what they need to do to win, like stick a target of 50,000 Russians dead per month, is a great way to understand what you need to do to win the war. And I think that's the mentality of Ukraine. While now, I think the power shifted, because now, where we were reactive in 2022, Ukraine's now talking about how they can win the war. And the power shifted that we're now firing ballistics Can you imagine if we had fired ballistics in 2002 into Russia? We were talking about escalation, nuclear war. Now this is happening.
Exactly. So tell our viewers who might not know, where can they find you across the internet?
I'm on X, Blue Sky, Instagram. I'm on Snowy Old Dog, if you find me on there. I write for London Loves Business. You can find me on there. I have a YouTube channel now. It's Shaun Pinner, Live, Fight, Survive, which is the book title. And we do our voices from the front now. We're just starting to really, hopefully it will be an NGO at some point, but we're looking to raise the profile of people in Ukraine, people on the front lines, former POWs. We've got interviews with those. We've also got interviews with Ukrainians as well. So you can better understand the mentality and what's happening, and you don't have to go through mainstream media. It's pretty raw at the moment, but we're learning. I'm not from a YouTube background or anything like that, so I've watched the videos get better, the thumbnails get better, the production get better. Now I've got to get better at hosting and promoting that. So we're now a podcast on Spotify as well, Voices from the Front on Spotify and Apple Podcast. So we're trying to all of this is sustained by volunteers who donate and want to see this keep going forward. We've got trips to Canada this year. We're going to the Isle of Man later on this month to raise money for demining equipment and Prevail for the late Chris Garrett, who's set up a charity here. So we've got a lot of things we're doing at the moment. An orphanage, we're trying to get some clothes and food and alternative power systems while the winter's on in Dnipro, and really just showing people what Ukraine's like. It's not all about the war; it's about the beauty of Ukraine and what it has to offer. So we're not all about the war, but it's a new project. So I enjoy it, and and commentating on wherever I can in the media. So to try and sort of push back against the Russian propaganda that's calling us all Nazis, mercenaries, and terrorists, and clearly they're just imperialists and they want to take over the country. So it's about that. It's our home. It is our where we live. I'd like to think other people would do the same thing, and we just don't want to give it up without a fight. So hopefully, I wouldn't be here if I thought it was dangerous. Now, I'm like you said, a journalist, so I feel safe. I know that the lines aren't going to break, and we're only 3 hours from the front line. So, it's not quite how the Russians portray it at all. Which I tell everybody now to watch that space in Russia, because that's now a melting pot. That's where the Kindle's now going to go and explode. And I think it's taken 4 years to get to this point where now Russia's under pressure.
And I want to remind also people, you may already be following Shaun's Substack, but if you're not, make sure you're following the Substack. And I think it's very important that you consider subscribing. At a monthly level, you could do one level, but also if you subscribe long term, that's good. And then don't be afraid to go out and reach out to people who can do substantial support to build up what he's doing, because we do need your voice.
Yeah, we need everybody's. Yours, the collective. It is about, unfortunately, it is about, people tell me that they are moving from X. I tell people, you need to stay on there, pal. You need to, that's where the war is. Set up your alternative social media, but come back to X, keep fighting, keep reposting, keep sharing pro-Ukrainian content, because that's what's driving a lot of the pro-Ukrainian thoughts now. And even us going to Canada and doing tours of America, that's largely down to getting on the media and talking about the realities of what's happening here, not Russian propaganda, which has got such a foothold everywhere at the moment.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you for being here, brother. Welcome to being a journalist. I've been doing this here for 4 years, and I love to talk about Ukraine. It's a very important thing to do, but also I just love to talk about Ukrainians. They're amazing people. They've transformed my entire life, my perspective. So I'm very thankful that you're doing it.
Martin, I'm going to Canada in April, so I know I've spoken to you. I'm going over there. It's a massive diaspora. I'm going to Edmonton, Toronto. My family live in Toronto, so I'll be going over to Canada in April.
Well, thank you, my man.
Okay.
So go get some rest, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, see you later. Nice to speak to you all. Good night, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава і пиздець Російській Федерації.